thank you. You're probably wondering what to expect from some guy on the internet who says that he has the solution for your problem. Well, here's what you can expect. My intention with these training videos is to share all of the knowledge that I have accumulated over the years through my experiences in this area of multiple personalities. The intent here is to explain as simply as I possibly can abstract ideas and abstract elements. And quite honestly, that can be a daunting task because we live in a multidimensional universe, but we perceive things on basically five senses. What we can see, what we can hear, what we can touch, what we can smell, what we can taste. And the information that I'm trying to share with you, like I say, my intention is to make it as simple as possible. Now, the problem with that is that no matter how well I can explain a concept, it's always going to create questions. I welcome the questions because that's the second half of this. My intention is to put together a regular podcast to answer all of the questions that come up during the training. Some of these questions, they may simply be my lack of communication. Some of them may be new concepts or new ideas. Nonetheless, I welcome all questions that you might have. Feel free to send them. When I started on this journey, I knew absolutely nothing. Nothing about multiple personality disorder. I had never even heard of the subject. And I was in my early 20s, about 23, 24, when I encountered this. My wife at the time was having flashbacks and having a difficult time making it through the day. She would wake up, and when I would come home at the end of the day, she would say, you know what, I know I did something today, but I can't even remember what I did. So we thought that counseling would be good. And in that process, it was discovered that she had multiple personalities. And she came home one day and she said, what would you think if I told you that I had multiple personality disorder? That's what it was called back in that day. And I said, well, I have no idea. I've never even heard of it. What is it? And she says, well, it's like there's parts of me in me, and they're sort of me, but they're not. But they're inside of me, and they're separate from me, but they're the same. Do you know what I mean? And I had to look at her and say, I haven't got a clue. Explain it to me again. And her second attempt was just as bad as the first. And then my response was probably the worst thing that I could have said. Because I just looked at her and I said, are you trying to tell me that you're possessed? And she said, no, I think they belong there, but I'm not sure. And I said, wow, okay, I'm going to have to think about this for a while. That was my first introduction to this. I have said in the videos and the ones that are out for public consumption, and I would invite you, if you haven't seen those, you can get them on YouTube and look them up and go through each one of those because I share a great deal of knowledge, common knowledge. And I said in one of the videos that in order to do this work, you need three eyes. Imagination, information, and inspiration. Let's take information. Let's start with that one. Back when I started this journey, there was no information. The internet wasn't even up. And it within a couple of years, when we started this, it came up. And when we looked up and did the research on it, the limited research that we could do, we were told that it was going to take 12 to 15 years with no guarantees of her healing. And the therapy practice included abreactions. Now, what an abreaction is the reliving of the trauma and the horror that caused the problem in the first place. Well, that was all they knew back then. I'm sad to say there's not much more that they know today. So this whole concept of multiple personality disorder, and I've explained in my other videos that my perception on the disorder part of it, this whole concept of it really hasn't progressed much over the last 20, 30 years. They changed the name, which I think was a mistake because, I don't know. I guess if you're a clinician, dissociative identity disorder is great for insurance purposes. But to the altered personalities within a person, it's meaningless. They prefer multiple personalities. So the information back then wasn't available. And you could say that I am a pioneer in this arena, because the information that I have received from working with over 180, I think I'm up to 185 clients now over the years. And ironically enough, it seems like the further I try to distance myself from this, the more they come out of the woodwork. They will find me. I've just resigned myself to that fact. And as I have helped these people, the information that I am presenting in this video and in all the other training videos and on this website, the information that I am presenting comes from the many alter personalities and entities that I have spoken with who have tutored me in this process. So I have literally stepped behind the curtain as much as a person can in a physical form to learn these techniques and to learn what it takes to help a person heal from this. So, yes, my information is certainly a little unorthodox. I certainly did not learn anything from a clinical standpoint. In fact, my closest brush with that has been I've seen a therapist once or twice, probably because of the stress related to this. But outside of that, I have no professional training in this at all. All of my experience and all of my training came from on-the-job practice. And it started with my wife at the time. So I expect, and it is my hope, that you will take this information and you will do greater things than what I can even conceive of doing. Because my imagination is limited to just me. Well, that's not quite true. You compound and magnify the imagination that is necessary to take this information throughout the world. Imagination, I guess my lack of education didn't hurt me none, to coin Simon and Garfunkel, because I didn't have to unlearn anything. As I have taught seminars, I have found that the people who have the greatest difficulty grasping these concepts are the people who have had years and years of training, and they go through the process of having to unlearn the things that they learned to get where they are. In fact, I remember one of my early trainings, a man, we'll call him Joseph, on day 2 of a 4-day training, 40-hour seminar, he came to me and he bought me lunch. And he says, Keith, I am so excited about this. You don't understand. I have double doctorates. I've got 2 doctorates. I have spent years in school to learn how to help people. And so far, you have taught me more practical knowledge and more useful information than all the years of schooling. Now, he might have just been excited in the moment, but he was pretty adamant about that. And then he followed up with, and this is day 2. I can't wait till day 4. Well, we had a great seminar that seminar, and by day 4, he was thanking me, and I asked him, well, what was the greatest hurdle for you? Because I wanted some honest feedback, because I wanted to improve my trainings for the future. And he said, Keith, for me, the greatest hurdle for me was to take all of my training and all of my judgments, basically take my paradigm and set it to the side. I am asking you to do the very same thing. Because if you are going to base your therapy techniques and your ability to help others on just your imagination or just your training, your professional training, it will be more of a hindrance than anything else. This requires imagination. In fact, with my clients that I've worked with, there is a stark difference between those whose imagination was cultured and developed, and those that weren't. As an example, and a term that we use here is Mindscape. And the Mindscape is when you step behind the curtain, and it's almost like opening the curtain, and you walk into a whole new world. That is what we refer to as the Mindscape. And when you step into that world, you have everything that ranges from cities and countryside and brilliant colors and personalities everywhere to shadows and darkness. And the more fertile the imagination, the greater and the more developed the mindscape. And there's techniques on how to help both heal, and we will get to those in these training videos. But the point I'm trying to make is imagination is key. And just like it was necessary to create the mindscape where all of these personalities can live and associate with each other, the imagination is just as necessary and fun to help a person heal. One of my clients, for example, right after the abuse, was sat down in front of the television to watch Disney cartoons. And this happened over and over and over again. So it should come as no surprise that in her mindscape, when we stepped behind the curtain, I met the 7 dwarfs and Snow White and the wicked stepmother. And I thought the dwarfs were very creative on what they wanted to do. They took the wicked stepmother and dropped her down a mine shaft. And then they dumped a bunch of jewels on top of her. And with the idea that if she was exposed to enough beauty, that then she wouldn't be a wicked stepmother anymore, and that she would eventually love Snow White. Now, what a mindscape that was. And of course, the techniques that we use, of course, Prince Valiant appeared upon the scene. And of course, there were angels, and of course, there were other entities that came and intervened in her behalf. Of course, because whatever the mind can conceive, it can achieve. And that is particularly true behind the curtain. When I began, since I had no information and no formal training in this, my paradigm was not limited to the parameters of what I had been taught. So I was an open book. I was a blank slate, however you want to, a blank canvas, however you want to term it. And the one thing that I did have was a real strong desire to learn. You see, in my mind, a couple of things just didn't make sense. Thing number one was it didn't make any sense that a person would have to relive the horror and the abuse that created the problem in order to heal from the problem. That just didn't make sense. And yet, that was the therapy of the day. I understand now why that therapy model is used, probably more so than they do. But we'll get into that in later videos. I had a really strong desire to have my wife healed, very simply put. And I figured that if anybody needed information, and if anybody was entitled to learn how to help somebody heal, my wife and I were entitled at that time. Because I believe in a God, a loving God. And it didn't make sense. And even though I don't understand all of his ways, and I don't understand, or at least at that time, I didn't understand why abuse even has to happen. I did have a faith and a belief in his mercy in helping people find the solution to their problems. And at that point, I had a big problem. And I figured he had a big answer. And that brings me to the third I. The third I is inspiration. It stands to reason that if this process is a spiritual healing process or a processing of energy on a spiritual level, you can expect spiritual experiences. Why would you not? Now, are you going to have angels show up in your room and stand up in front of you? Probably not, but your clients will. Are you going to feel radiant energy from some source in your office? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I truly don't know. I can tell you by experience, though, that as different energies have healed my clients from behind the curtain, I could feel that energy from where I was sitting. And I can assure you this, that spiritual experiences are more the norm than they are the exception. And that would just make sense. Now, let me set up a little bit of a disclaimer. I have gone out of my way to take my personal beliefs and my personal religious beliefs and doctrine and set it on the shelf. Just like I just asked you to set your beliefs and your paradigms on the shelf, I'm doing the same. The information that I'm going to share with you in these training videos comes directly from the many clients and their alter personalities, directly from them. All of my personal beliefs, all of my religious upbringing, the doctrines that I have learned, I have purposely set them aside during these training videos and through this whole website. And the purpose or the reasoning behind that is I'm not an evangelist. The purpose of these trainings and the purpose of this website is not to sway your religious beliefs one way or another. In fact, and I don't know how else to say this except to just come right on out and say it, your personal beliefs don't matter. Because, well, let me give you an example. This morning I woke up, And I went outside and I took care of my goats. And I took care of my chickens. And my wife and I live in a rural community, and we have goats and chickens, and that is our reality because we like it. And then I prepared my notes, and I came on in here to shoot this video because that's part of my reality. This whole therapy process is part of my reality. There's no way I can exit it. It's part of me. It is part of who I am. That is my reality. And that is real to me. However, my reality means virtually nothing to the alter personalities in the mindscape of somebody I'm working with. What happens in their mindscape is more real than you are, more real than me, because they associate with each other all the time. And when I say all the time, in many cases, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they associate with each other all the time. So to them, their reality is what matters, not mine, not what I did this morning, and not what I'm going to do this evening. And to take the time to try and convince them that they don't exist, well, you're just wasting your breath. That's a lost cause. Because how are they supposed to take it when you're trying to tell them and convince them that not only do they not exist, but hey, wait a minute, all of these others that are around me, they don't exist either, but wait a minute, we do exist. Okay? Their reality is paramount. And even if you didn't believe what happens in their mindscape, it doesn't matter. Did I believe that there was 7 dwarfs inside her mindscape? Not according to my reality, but my reality didn't matter. Her reality was what was paramount. So what I have done is I have taken collective information from behind the curtains. And as I've mentioned in some of my other videos, that there seems to be a language or a world that is universal behind the curtain from client to client to client. And they understand certain things. They understand things like out on the grid, or energy work, or releasing or letting go, or words like quickening. That's a word that I had heard only a few times in my life before I started doing this, and they're the ones that introduced me to the quickening process, and that'll be later in other videos. The point I'm getting at is when you talk to over 100 clients and you're invited behind the curtain of all of these clients, and they start telling you the same thing, after a while you start noticing trends and a belief system and a spiritual world that they all understand. And I have done my best to focus all the information and all of the training on the world that they have introduced me to. And I am leaving all of my beliefs to the side. Now, interestingly enough, probably 80-90% of what I believe religiously applies to what goes on behind the curtain. And what I have noticed with this process is it doesn't matter what the belief system is of your client who comes walking through the door. I have worked with Hindus. I have worked with people from different lands. I've worked with people who spoke different languages until you get behind the curtain, and then they all tend to speak the language that I speak. And I've worked with people who were non-Christian. And when you get behind the curtain, Christ has a stronger presence than what you would imagine. And they all know who he is. It just seems that the host who comes walking in your door is completely unaware of what goes on behind the curtain. Because behind the curtain is the information that is behind the curtain is on a need-to-know basis. So, with that in mind, it doesn't matter to me what religion you are. It doesn't matter to me what your belief system is. It doesn't matter to me what your faith in Christ is or not. It doesn't matter. And the reason for that, and it will become clearly obvious as we go through these trainings, the principle of choice is paramount. As soon as you remove the principle of choice, and we'll get into that through the trainings, but the principle of choice is key. And I respect that principle of choice in you as much as I do in the community of my client behind the curtain. I in no way am trying to persuade anybody. My intent is not to convert anybody to my religion or my way of thinking. My church does not endorse, nor does it condemn this work. This is completely independent. Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly referred to as the Mormons. Interestingly enough, growing up in that kind of a culture and having one foot in the metaphysical world and one foot in a conservative Christian world, it made for some pretty unusual and awkward moments. However, as I said, my perception of reality and my reality is secondary to the reality of what's going on behind the curtains. You might not feel this way, but for me, it is very important that I wanted to clear that up and get that out there in the first place. If I use quotes from church leaders, mind you, it's because that's what I'm exposed to, and you will probably find the same or similar quotes from other philosophies and other areas of religion. I'm just going from the basis or from the foundation that I have. So if I use LDS language, it's because that is the perspective that I grew up with, and that is what I have to work with. The intention is not to convert, the intention is to communicate. So now that we've gotten this out of the way, and we understand my intentions, we understand my qualifications, we understand where this information came from, we can move on to the first video.